Hello chess friends, welcome back. We're in our 12-part series. Today I'm going over part 5B. I actually don't want to call it part 6 because I've got only 12 lessons to do and I want to make sure we get all 12. So today's part 5B. Thanks for joining us again. We're going over pawn endgames today, and this is a position that I made up that I really enjoy. In fact, I have tried to perfect it, and I like to spring this on good players and kind of surprise them with it and make them play with me in my little drill I've made up. And I play against computers and stuff with it and really like it. And this is a good way to learn our pawn endgame. So we started last time winning with the opposition. Very difficult and very advanced, especially for your first endgame. And that's just kind of the trouble with chess. If you're going to learn that endgame, you're going to start into your endgame career, you've got to learn the opposition first, and it is a tricky one. It can be a stumbling block for lots of people, and I hope that you took time to master it as any good artist would, and make sure that you have it down so that you're off to a good start. We're building foundational blocks that will eventually turn into something very productive and a very good chess base and knowledge. And it's something that every Russian schoolboy would know. So, and I hate to take Alex Yermolinsky away there. He'd probably get me on copyright there, because Alex Yermolinsky is the founder of the chess series every Russian schoolboy knows, and it's a great series. I really enjoy it. And so here we are, learning about our pawns, and we already know how to win with the opposition, a king and one pawn against a king. And now we're into a position that's very even. One side has 3 pawns, one side has 2 on this side. Black has 3 pawns on this side against 2 on this side. And so here what we're going to do, and our main goal in these pawn endgames, is to try and promote a pawn into a queen. And if we promote a pawn into a queen, we're going to easily be able to stop our opponent from promoting a pawn into a queen, and we're going to be able to do our 1 queen checkmate that we learned. Even possible is to promote 2 pawns into queens and do our 2 rook checkmate with 2 queens that we learned in our second lesson. And so this is the goal. We got to know what our goal is. Our goal is to get a pawn across the board. Now, doing that in a position that's even with an opponent that wants to get a pawn across is not easy. However, if you know the 3 rules of pawn endgames that we're going to learn, you're going to be able to beat your opponent that doesn't know them every time. The first rule of the endgame, especially these pawn endgames, is you want to have your king in the game. Now, that is difficult for many players. You want your king back here where he's safe. You think of your king as a weak player that shouldn't be doing anything and should be sitting there lazy on the couch. But there's these moments in time where our king is very useful. And this is one of them where there's no pieces that can checkmate your king up here. Not easily at least. We should be fairly safe. Our king actually needs to be in the action. One of the greatest world champions, Jose Raul Capablanca, was fantastic at getting his king out in the middle of the game and won some brilliant games by edging out great competition with a small advantage of having his king closer to the center, so when the end game came, he was ready to bring his king to the middle. And that's what we want to do. So we start here by bringing our king up into the center. And in fact, if we had 3 turns, we could put our king here. I believe this is the difference from here having a perfectly even position, and if we could get these extra 3 moves, here having a position white should win. And so that is huge to say. If you can blitz your king to the center, it could be a win right there. And so let's just look at some ways this king can be very powerful. Let's say it's black's turn here and black makes a move, and black's going to move his pawns, and we're going to move our king. Okay? Black's just thinking, hey, I need to get queen. I need to get my pawn across the board and promote. And we're thinking, we need to get our king in the game because our king's powerful. Getting our king in turns out to be a much better option. Here what we've done is we've gotten our king beside the pawns. Notice how these pawns make a wall in front of them, so it's futile to try to come up here and attack the pawns, but we moved our king to the center and now are able to come over. Now these pawns are vulnerable from the side. And even if they try to push one pawn and protect it, we'll just move our king over, and our king's a little monster there. He's going to take everything. There's nothing that's going to be left over here. This was the side that black started with more pawns, and look at our king. When he moves here, we're going to go and take this one, and our king will hopefully get in here and take the rest. And even if black tries to come in here and stop our king from getting these pawns, damage is already done. We won a pawn. Now we've got 3 pawns against his 2 over there, and we've totally stopped his pawns. So it can be very dangerous to get your king in the game early. And my biggest hint in this whole thing is use your king in the endgame. It really, if you just marched your king around, and you're just a beginner, but you just took my words to heart and you just marched your king around in this drill, you'd do better than most people. Because a lot of people will push their pawns and make bad moves instead of just moving your king up and helping. So, we know that getting the king in the center is powerful. Now what we really want to do is we want to get our king somewhere in the middle like that, and then we want to be able to shoot to the left if there's an opportunity, or shoot to the right. Say black moved his pawns on this side, right? Let's say black had moved his pawns up over here, then we could have easily shot to the left side and been able to go take those pawns over there. So, be opportunistic, move your king up to the center, be ready to move left, be ready to move right. If you move your king to one side or the other, you're one-sided, he knows where your king is. Your king's not a fast piece, it's not going to be able to go all the way from one side to the other quickly. You could get yourself in some trouble. So, that's the plan there. Now, second rule of pawn endgames, the next most important thing to know, is to push your pawn side majority. So, we have 3 against 2, we want to push these 3 pawns. He has 3 against 2, he wants to push these 3. Let's take a look at what usually happens when you face an opponent who doesn't do that. Say we marched our pawns up, he marched his pawns down. What's going to happen in many, many different ways, shapes, and forms are the pawns are going to trade off. We take a pawn, he takes a pawn. However, what's left for us is 1 pawn. We call this a pass pawn because it's got an open road to queen. So we're left with 1 pass pawn, he's got no defenders. So that's a good thing for us. And let's say it's white's turn here. We know we have a pass pawn, but if we're unwise here and we just push the pawn down the board, the black king has time to go take that. And I can easily count that the black king is going to be able to come take our pawn by a rule we call the pawn square. So white pushes his pawn up. Now the pawn square in chess is an easy way to tell if this black king can catch the pawn. So white just moved, it's black's move. The way we count the pawn square is we go up 3, over 3, down 3. So this pawn is 3 squares from promoting. 1, 2, 3. So we just make a box 3 by 3 by 3 by 3. It's actually going to be 4 by 4 because we'll go up 3, over 1, 2, 3, down 3, over 3. And so when we count 3, we're going to end up 4 squares. So you have this box. You can also go diagonal to the end and then up to where your pawn is, and you draw this box in your head. Question is, can the black king get in the box? Since the answer is yes, the king can move into the box, either here, here, or here, then he's going to be able to catch this pawn. Now, every time the pawn moves, the box gets smaller. Now, when the pawn moves, the box is 2, 2, 2, 2, but the king can stay inside the box. Now, the box is 1, 1, 1, 1. The king can stay in the box. And when the pawn promotes, yes, it turns into a queen, but queens can be taken just like any other piece. The black king just chops it off the board, and you're left with nothing. Nice work. So instead of that, what white's going to do, instead of pushing his pawn, he can tell, okay, if I go here, the pawn square is 4 by 4, the king can get in there. Instead of doing that as white, what you do is you say, okay, that king can catch me. Instead, you march your king over. So now we'll end up in a position more like this, and let's even say black's king made it, all the way over here, let's say. So black's king got in here, he defended us from pushing our pawn up the board. So, we've got to switch strategies here, since our pawn wasn't out of the pawn square. Now, if the pawn was out of the pawn square, we'd blitz that pawn, promote that pawn, game would be over. That would be no problem. But since the black king got over for defense, we defended with our king. Now, we are still doing better than our opponent here, because remember, we started by pushing our pawn side majority. We have a pass pawn, he doesn't. That's an advantage to us. And what we're going to do, the strategy we're going to use to win here is called the bait pawn. We're going to use this pawn as bait to end up taking these guys and winning the game. And what we do is we say, okay, chess is a tough game. We're not going to win with all of our soldiers that we started with. We're going to have to give a few up. This guy, he worked hard for us. We really, we're going to give him a good funeral. But in the meantime, black's going to go get him. We're going to give him up. He's going to be bait. And that allows this king to come in here and take him. Another way to put it is Jeremy Silman likes to say fox in the chicken coop. We let him take this pawn so that we can get our fox in the chicken coop. These pawns are just easy targets for the fox here. He's going to take them all. And what I like to say is, okay, this king is all the way over here, had to come take our pass pawn. He's got to cross the Sahara Desert. I mean, for a king, this is a long distance to come over here and take our pawns. In the meantime, we're going to be able to take all these. Now, the only hope black has is trying to finagle a way out so that we can't get to his pawns. So we can try to go there, and then if we're not careful, he'll push all his pawns down the board. Like this, if we're not careful and we just waste our time and come take this pawn, these pawns could actually get down the board on us. So what we make sure we do is we make sure we catch up to those advanced pawns, and then when it's all said and done, our king's going to be able to get to all those pawns This king's still got to cross the Sahara Desert. We already know how to win with a king and extra pawns. A king and 1 extra pawn we learned last turn. A king and 2 pawns is even easier. So since we learned that opposition, it's going to help us here. Let's just take a look at what might happen so we can see it all the way through. While this king is coming over here, maybe he's going to come down and try to take our pawns. By the time he gets there, you know, for one, if the king comes beside our pawn, we can do a pawn double jump. And now he can't catch us from queening. And then we're going to be able to get a queen and use our 1 queen checkmate to win. Or if he had come up here, then we might just move our king in to help. And now he's not even beside the pawns, so these pawns make this wall. And we might have to work a little bit harder. We might have to like push this pawn. And in the end, he might get to take one of our pawns. But we're going to be able to get this one across now, and this king can't catch it. And we'll get a queen. We'll use our 1 queen checkmate, and we'll win. And so you can see there that that's our strategy. That's our long-term goal. Is we're going to push our side with more pawns, and we're going to get a pass pawn. And whenever you push the side with more pawns, that's what that creates, a pass pawn. So when we pushed our side with 3 pawns, we got 1 pawn past our opponent, it was a pass pawn. Now, if that pass pawn's out of the pawn square and the king can't catch it, great, push it up to the end and win. If he can catch it, then what you want to do is use that pawn for bait, make the king go over there, your king does the bait and switch, comes over here and takes these pawns, and you win the game. So, that's the second rule, push your pawn side majority. And this is just an example. You could be in a game where you had 2 pawns versus 1, where you had 4 pawns versus 3. Anytime you have more pawns on one side of the board than your opponent, push those, okay? So, last rule of the pawn, of the pawn wars and the pawn endgames is watch the pawn square. So we now know what the pawn square was. The pawn square was when we were deciding a pass pawn that's going down the board, can the king catch it or not? If the pawn is here and the box is 2, 2, 2, 2, this king cannot come over here and get our pawn. He can't get in the box, so we're going to win. So we're going to watch that pawn square every turn. And to show you some examples of how that can be important, I want to set up some positions that happen in this pawn war and show you what can happen. Here's one of my favorite positions. White has pushed all of his pawns up the board and has done a good job pushing his pawns. However, the black king, not unlike the drill we did before, has come to the side of the pawns and is ready to take them. And now what white has to try to do is get one of these 3 pawns past the black 2 pawns and make it so that it's outside of the pawn square so this king can't take it. Not an easy task. This is a very difficult problem, and I'm going to let you guys take a few minutes, pause the tape, see if you can solve this problem. It's white to move and win. If white makes any move with his king or pawns, black's going to mow through these pawns like a fox in the chicken coop. So what white has to do is he has to somehow finagle away that these 3 pawns can get, one of them can become a queen. And then he'll win the game. So all bets are off, everything is on the line here. Just pause your video, try to solve this problem. Okay, so now, the answer is to actually move this pawn first. That threatens that we're going to take in queen, forcing black to take our pawn. Then when he takes our pawn, we push this pawn up. And the key here is not to be greedy. We don't care if we lose 2 of our pawns, as long as one of our pawns becomes a queen. We have to be very goal-oriented here. Let black take this pawn, and then another greed test here. If you take this pawn, not good. If you take it, the pawn square is 2, 2, 2, 2. This king can get in the pawn square. He will be able to take your pawn. 1, 1, 1, 1. The king gets in the pawn square, and you're in some trouble. But if you can stay away and hold off the greed in this position and push your pawn instead of taking, now the pawn square is 2, 2, 2, 2, and unfortunately black can't take his own piece to get back in the pawn square. So now white's going to get a pawn across the board, black's not going to be able to stop it, we're going to push pawn and pawn, we're going to get a queen. Even though black's got 3 extra pawns than us, it's no problem. The queen is going to be the decisive factor that wins the game. So, that being said, there's a problem where we really had to watch the pawn square, and if we get our pawns out of the pawn square, we won. Let me show you one more famous position that is a good problem working on the pawn square. So this time we're going to have black has the opportunity to win. White has an extra pawn. He could even use that as a bait pawn. He'd love to move his king over here and just go take all these. And black has a chance, though. It's black's move, we're going to say. And black has an opportunity here to somehow get these 3 pawns past these 3 pawns. It doesn't seem possible, but it is. and it's another pawn break. So we call these pawn breaks, and it's working on somehow getting your pawns out of the pawn square so the king can't catch it. So again, pause your video if you'd like to. Try to solve this problem. This is an even tougher one than the last one, and it's a really good problem to know. If you just have a few pawn breaks memorized, you pretty much can surmise what's going to happen in all the pawn breaks. And there's some really cool problems in chess with pawn breaks, and I really love these endgames. It's just my favorite part of the game. I love to outplay people in really interesting positions. People don't realize how complicated the endgame is, so it seems really simple, and then just small details win the game, and that's what I really love about it. So anyway, I'm going to go over the answer now. Hopefully you've thought about it for a while. The answer for black is pawn up in the center. If he moves a side pawn, then white will just push the center pawn, and if black takes or pushes any way black plays, all of his pawns are stuck. And once you're stuck, there's not much you can do, you're going to lose this game. So you have to try to get some energy going down. You push this pawn. Now you're threatening to take these pawns, so he has to take you with one pawn or the other. Whichever pawn he takes you with, you're going to push the other side, and here you've created an awesome position where you're going to take this and promote, unless he takes you, and if he takes you, then this pawn comes here. And now, even though white's got 4 pawns and we only have 1, this pawn is on its way to becoming a queen, and you're going to have no problem stopping all of his pawns once you get a queen. This pawn's going to move down the board and become a queen. So, again, black's going to win, not being greedy, giving up some material to win, and getting his pawn across the board. And I would recommend you check out that position in your head a little bit and put it on your chessboard and make sure you really see that idea clearly. So we're going to go back. This is the start to the pawn war. Find somebody to play this drill with and to practice it a bunch of times, whether it's yourself, whether it's a computer that lets you set up the position so you can try it against the computer. I like doing that here. Or whether it's anybody that will play chess with you. You just set up this position, switch off between white and black, and practice the 3 rules of the pawn endgames. Keeping your king in the game, very important. Pushing your pawn side majority, the side with more pawns. And lastly, watching that pawn square and the pawn break so that you always can make good decisions about pushing your pawn or about making pawn breaks. And so here's our 3 rules for the pawn endgame. This is part 5B. This really helps you understand pawn endgames if you play this a lot. Nothing can help more than practice now that you know the fundamentals. So good luck practicing and improving. This was lesson 5B. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be looking forward to lesson 6 soon, where we'll be going through an opening and seeing why masters make the moves they do. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.